Welcome to episode number 4 of the Spiraling Podcast. I am your host, Jackson Wallace. Today we are joined by Haven Boggs, known to his family as Haven, known to his professional life as Harold Boggs. Harold is Jason's sponsor, and he's very kind enough to join us today on the show. We also have Jason, as always. But Harold, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Things have gotten very busy. Which is good news.
Yes, good, busy, good, I hope.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, I think we're very excited. You're our first guest. It's just been me and Jason on the past couple of episodes, and we're thrilled to have somebody else here with us, just so we can kind of pick your brain a little bit, kind of about some different topics. But I was actually curious. I was hoping maybe you can give our listeners a little bit about your history and your current credentials.
Yes, I graduated from Portland State. Well, let me start at the beginning and kind of give you an overview of how my recovery has gone. I'm a person in recovery. Okay. And I'm grateful to God for every day of my recovery. I passed the 11,000 day mark some months ago, and every day that's a gift from God. So the story begins, the important part of the story begins when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. I was molested by my older half-brother.
Oh my!
We lived in the same household. I knew him as my brother, and that molestation, sexual molestation, stopped when I was 11 because he went in the Navy, and wow. I kept it a secret. I didn't know who to tell. When a child goes through something like that, it's very confusing for the child because you look up to your older brother, but at the same time, you know this is wrong, but some of it feels good. So it sets up what's called cognitive dissonance, and it's very difficult for kids. So I just kept it a secret. And when I turned 20, I started drinking, and the drinking was heavy drinking. I had to keep the lid on that jar of shame. So that continued. I was depressed. I didn't know where to go with the story of being molested. And so that continued 20 years. When I turned 40, a friend of mine from high school died.
Oh, wow.
And the light bulb finally came on, and I decided to quit my drinking and drugging. I was experimenting with drugs, and I realized how dangerous it was, so I quit everything cold turkey. Now, I don't recommend that for people who are drinking daily. I wasn't drinking daily at the time.
Okay.
But when I started drinking, I couldn't predict where it would stop, so that indicates a dependency. And so when people are drinking daily and they stop cold turkey, they can have a seizure and actually die. I lost a client in 2011 that way. So hardly anybody knows that. So if you know someone that's drinking daily and they want to quit, tell them not to stop cold turkey. So I quit, and my recovery has 3 big parts. Part 1 is stopping. It's very important to completely stop after you've crossed that line and you've become dependent. Part 2 of recovery is to learn how to stay stopped, and that's 20 times as hard as stopping because of my selfishness and my pride. And the best way I know of to level the pride and get some humility and stop the selfishness and get some empathy back is working the 12 steps. They were borrowed from the Bible in 1935. So wow. wandered into an AA meeting and found someone to guide me through. This was up in the Northwest, and I worked the steps and with his guidance. So I worked steps 1 through 11, and that's 49% of the program. Then part 3 of my recovery is step 12. I reached back to help someone newer in the program work their steps. That's when my steps clicked in, not until. So that's part 3 of the program. That's step 12. And we have a motto: we only get to keep what we give away.
Interesting.
So that's an overview of my my program, my recovery. That was I started that December 28th, 1987. So as of now, I have over 11,000 days, and it's every one of those is a gift from God. So with my recovery, I also I lost a marriage.
I'm sorry.
And that often occurs after recovery begins. It's so complicated. But I also took that opportunity to go back to college, finish my bachelor's, go for my master's, and become a family therapist formally, because I'd worked in a volunteer capacity in the state prisons, and in the state hospitals, mental hospitals, and in many church settings.
Yeah.
But I formalized it by getting a license in marriage and family therapy and a certification as a drug counselor, and my LPC license, licensed professional counselor. And so that's where I work now full time. And I'm 72, but
you don't look 72, my friend. You look quite young.
Plan retiring anytime soon.
Wow, that's a powerful story. What an introduction. Thank you for sharing that with us. Jason, just a quick question for you. How did you get to meet this wonderful gentleman?
Many years ago. Harold, probably 7-8 years ago now.
Yes.
Yeah. So throughout my addiction and alcohol abuse, I tried to stop several times throughout the years. And the one thing that I've always really loved about Harold was every time that I would say I'm going to stop, he was there to help me. And it really provided me encouragement to say, when I finally decided to stop and say I'm done, Harold was there to welcome me back into the program, and this last time just clicked. And I've gone 2 years now, and I do not have any urges. And I know one thing that Harold always tells me is when I stop having the urges, that's when it's most dangerous. Because Satan will come in and try to tempt me. But to be honest with you, I don't have any of those temptations. My wife can have drinks in front of me. It doesn't bother me. I smell it and it just makes me nauseous. So, the one thing that really clicked with me was 3 months into my sobriety was being diagnosed with cancer. And I contribute my cancer to all the drugs and alcohol that I put in my body over the years. Right. And I think that's why it's so easy now. And it's so easy for me to say, drugs, I don't need them. Alcohol, I don't need it. I'm a sugar fiend. I always have to have something sweet around me. But that's from the alcohol from over the years. But I don't have any. I still have dreams every once in a while of drinking or drugging. But I wake up and I'm in reality, and I put my 2 feet off the bed and say, today's a new day, and I'm going to stay sober today. And that's one thing that Harold has taught me throughout the years.
Every
Smart, man.
morning I still get up, and the first thing I do is say, God, no matter what happens today, absolutely no alcohol, no drugs, nothing mind altering. And that's how it's done. We take one day at a time. I can do something for one day that I could never dream of doing long term. And so that's how we take it, one day at a time. Sometimes during a lot of stress, it's 1 hour at a time.
Or 1 minute at a time, minute by minute.
Yeah.
You have to, when you think about it, 11,000 days, right?
Yes.
For you, Harold, that's a super long time. If you had at the beginning of this, say, I'm going to go 11,000 days without anything, that's kind of mind numbing to think about it. It's hard to approach, to even wrap your head around it. But if you say 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, it's a lot easier to get through it. Wow. And incredibly powerful.
What Jason and I have talked about many times is staying alert, because while we're in recovery,
right,
the enemy is out there in the parking lot doing push-ups, getting stronger, waiting for an opening. And my sponsor told me this early on. He said a number of really great things. The main thing that he said to me that helped me the most is, Harold, your drinking is a search for God at the wrong address. That really helped me. He also said, look out for overconfidence. The enemy's going to speak up and say to you at some point, hey, look at you. You've arrived. You've got this thing. You can test it out. You can drink just a bit.
Yeah.
And then I said, so that hit me at the 5-year mark. I didn't know when it was coming, but my sponsor got me prepared for it. So yes, at the 5-year mark, the enemy said to me, look at you, 60 months without a drink, a drug, nothing. Just you ought to celebrate. You ought to test it out, drink a little bit. You can handle it. Trust me.
Yeah.
So I said no to that. I was looking for it coming. So he wasn't defeated, though. He goes around the side door and says, well, okay, you don't drink, you don't test it out, but at least you don't have to keep working with those knucklehead new guys, and you don't need to be talking to your sponsor all the time, and you don't need to go to so many meetings. You can put up your feet and coast a while. You can relax. And that sounded pretty good. A couple of days turned into a couple of weeks like that. Well, luckily, my friends in the program looked around, where's Harold? We need him in here. Came and got me by the collar, pulled me back in and said, look, we need you to work with these new guys, and they saved my life.
They got you back into it, yeah.
I have a friend of a friend who had 22 years, and the enemy voice said, hey, you don't need so many meetings now. You've arrived. And so he quit going to meetings, and he quit doing the things that keep us in the program.
Sure.
And within 6 months, he not only drank again, wrecked his car, lost his job, lost his house, lost his family. He was living in his mom's basement. And this is all within 6 months.
Wow.
After 22 years of solid recovery, they found him dead with a needle in his arm. He didn't even use drugs before, but he died.
That's how quick it can turn.
So the enemy is vigilant, and he is patient. So we've got to keep our guard up. That's my method, my message for everybody.
Wow, that's a powerful message, especially when you tell that story of 22 years of in recovery, and then how fast it can turn. You know, we blink an eye and 6 months is gone.
That's it.
That's absolutely crazy. I do have another question though for you. It is, what kinds of, because you're practicing, you've been practicing for a while at the Houston Center for Christian Counseling. What kinds of addictions are you seeing on a daily basis?
Well, mostly I see compulsive sexual behavior.
Really?
Here's what we're finding, that if there's a drug problem or an alcohol problem, 90% of the time behind that is secret sexual sin. And that, in what I'm beginning to see, is that's really the basis. We're also seeing a lot of pain pill addiction. Yeah. And it's so easy because the doctors haven't warned us. Well, the doctors have been lied to by the big pharmaceutical companies, and then they've passed that lie along. They've been deceived. They're deceiving their patients, and the way it works is we take the pills exactly the way the doctor said to, and when we have physical pain, we take the medications, and the pain eats up the medications. Then after the pain subsides, the doctor forgets to mention that we should taper down on the pain pills. So we keep taking the medications, and the medications also work on emotional pain. That's when we've crossed the line and we become dependent on the medications, because the brain has built into it the automatic ability to get used to the chemicals we're putting in there. And after a while, we need the chemicals just to get back up to normal, because the body's developed some tolerance to the medication. So the enemy voice says, "Oh, you need more pills to get the same effect," and we've ended up crossing the line. So I see a lot of people addicted to pain pills, a lot of people who drink too much. Yeah. It's smiled upon in our culture. The government gets a lot of tax dollars from alcohol, but one of the problems with alcohol is it's dangerous to drink. It's also dangerous to stop. As I mentioned earlier, if a daily drinker stops suddenly, cold turkey, he can get a seizure and die. Wow. And so there's a lot of danger. And here's a fact. Every day, more people die from alcohol overdose than all the drug overdoses put together, but it's never on the news.
You don't hear a lot about it.
Washington, D.C. wants their tax dollars. So alcohol, drugs, and after the pain pills, after the prescriptions run out, people buy street drugs. They buy heroin on the street. You never know what's in that. It's not prepared by a pharmacy.
Right.
There's a lot of heroin addicts. Then the heroin addicts want to get off of their heroin, so they take Suboxone at a Suboxone clinic. That's very difficult to get off of, although it's not quite as dangerous as heroin because it keeps... So it's just multiple things that feed one another.
Sure.
And an attack by the enemy. I get to talk to a lot of people who believe in God, and it seems to me that people who believe in God have extra temptation, because the enemy doesn't like believers. He hates God and he hates believers, so he wants to take believers out. So that's a factor also.
Right.
Also, I see people who do a lot of gambling. Okay. And some people, like my dad, who rest his soul, he was addicted to rage. Rage gives you a definite high.
And, wow, that's interesting. I haven't heard
of
that.
He quit drinking. He drank like a fish, but he never got recovery. When he quit drinking, he would rage. And my folks divorced when I was 12, and that was a significant factor in that. I was relieved when they got divorced, because the war zone stopped. Yeah. Both Mom and my dad had rage. It was awful.
Wow. Which one, You spoke about a lot of different kinds of addiction. Which one concerns you the most, if you had to pick?
Well, it's the secret sexual sin.
Okay.
That one is. Oh, and I forgot to mention food addictions.
Oh yeah.
With alcohol or drugs, we can completely stop, and that's really an important part of my recovery, is total abstinence. But what do we do when we're when we're medicating our emotions with food? We can't completely stop.
Right.
And so that calls for a special type of approach, special treatment, where we learn to think about food differently. It's very difficult. And here is the bottom line. Food addiction problems, eating disorders, are the most fatal addictions of all.
Yeah.
There's 15% mortality rate with food addictions. So that concerns me the most. And there's also a factor with all addiction and recovery that there's quite a high suicide rate. And so I'm an expert in suicide prevention, so that's very worrisome too. Heart disease is on the decline, and cancer treatments are really great. But when it comes to suicide, that's on the rise, and that's a big worry.
Yeah, that's definitely troubling. I also know that you treat PTSD.
Yes.
When we think of that, we think of the most common. We think of that in the military. But what other incidents can cause this, and how do you help somebody that's been through that?
That's a terrific question. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is the label that we use when someone's been through a traumatic event, like that bomb that went off in that factory that exploded in Houston several months ago. I've had several clients with PTSD from that. That's a one-time event.
Yeah.
I've many clients who were in a terrible car wreck, and now they have a lot of stress and tension when they drive. That's PTSD. In the military, people have PTSD from being blown up or being shot. Now there's a new diagnosis, even newer than PTSD. It's so new that it's not in the new diagnostic manual, the DSM-5. You can go on the internet and look up all these diagnoses and get a lot of great information about the DSM-5, Diagnostic Statistic Manual 5.
Okay.
But there's a new diagnosis called complex PTSD. Complex PTSD is the type of situation that I lived through, being molested at ages 8 and 9, 10 and 11, dozens and dozens of incidents that were stressful and confusing. So that's complex PTSD. And fortunately, the same solutions fit all these various stressors. And that is to really summarize it in one sentence, it's developing a closer walk with God. Step 11, the 12th step says, through prayer and meditation, I increased my conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for me and the power to carry that out.
Right.
So that is the solution, to learn about God and then learn to walk with God. And that there are many ways to do that. One of the best ways is the 12-step program. It's been adopted and adapted for use with people with gambling problems, drug problems. We've got Marijuana Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. um, and all kinds of different adaptations of the 12 steps. But the whole idea is to turn your life over to God. And there's some terrific videos out there on the internet, on YouTube, called I Am Second. And it's little 7-minute stories about people who've turned their lives over to God, and they tell their story in a very brief video. Terrific to watch that.
I've seen a lot of different commercials. I Am Second, especially when I'm a big fan of the NFL. And so whenever I watch those games, I see a lot of those commercials, especially coming up during halftime or, the first quarter break. But speaking of I Am Second and turning your life over to God, I know that was a big part in Jason's recovery. And his keys to success. So how do you, when it comes to the counseling and turning yourself over to God, and Jason, maybe you can weigh on this a little bit, how do you inject that into your counseling services, Harold? And maybe Jason, you can speak about your experiences with that too, with your counseling.
That's great. Do you want to weigh in on that, Jason?
Sure, yeah. So the first thing that I had to realize, and it's part of the 12 steps, is completely surrendering yourself to God. What that means is you give up everything, your day-to-day actions, your thoughts, everything. You give it up to God and put it in God's hands. Once you completely surrender yourself to God is whenever the healing process starts. And the recovery actually begins. I'm a firm believer in that. Until you can have that relationship with God, you're going to be tempted by Satan. I've shared with you guys some of my tribulations over the last couple of weeks with family issues, but I'm tempted every day. I'm tempted with loss of family members, loss of family friends. Kids might have cancer. It's nonstop. And what I contribute to that is it's Satan tempting me. But what I've said for the last year and a half, 2 years since I was diagnosed with the cancer, I completely turned my life over to God. And that is what has allowed me to continue to walk on the path of sobriety and say, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to drug, I'm going to continue to be righteous. Doesn't mean I don't have issues with my wife. Yeah, we argue, we fight. Any couple that lives and works together 24/7 is going to have those issues. But at the end of the day, I love my family, I love myself, and I love God. To put God first is what really matters.
That's a good way of putting it, Jace. The first step of the 12 steps says, we admitted that we were powerless over our compulsive behaviors, that our lives were unmanageable, which to me means once I start drinking, I can't predict where it'll stop. So that's unmanageability. And that's powerlessness. Step 2 says, came to believe that a power greater than us could restore us to sanity. And step 3 says, we made a decision to turn our wills and our lives over to the care of God. Mm-hmm. So that forms the beginning of recovery. And step 11, as I said earlier, is where we use prayer and meditation to increase our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. So the program is really all about God. It's all about also observing yourself. And the step 4 is an inventory where we observe ourselves and we take stock of where we are, where we're going. That's a very important step. It stops a lot of people. It's difficult, but we help you through it. We help one another through it.
Yeah.
Step 5 is where we admit our wrongs to God, to ourselves, and to another person. And then steps 6, 7, 8, and 9 is where we make amends to people we've harmed. Very important to get our integrity back and make amends and make up for what we've done.
Yeah.
Step 11 is more closeness with God. And then step 12 is where we pass this along and we help other people, newer people, through their 12 steps. So that's what I do, both in the office and in public. I do a lot of public service. I still go to meetings. That's where I find new people that I can help. And our motto is, we only get to keep what we give away. I want to keep it, so I continually give it away. Now, let me talk a little bit about the center where I work. It's called the Houston Center for Christian Counseling.
Please.
It's the most fantastic place I've ever worked. It is really something. Now, we do not force religion on anyone. Sure. My assignment is to come alongside people where they are and help them with their next step. So I see people who are Muslim, who are atheist, who Buddhist, religions from all over the world. I see Christians, people who have completely turned their back on the church. They feel hurt by the church. It's so I meet them where they are, really listen carefully, and then help them with their next step. For people that don't want anything to do with God, recovery is available to them too, because what we're talking about with that step 1, that we're powerless over our tendency to do the wrong thing, our compulsive behavior. Every one of us has this part that is self-sabotage. And I call it the enemy voice, but it doesn't matter what we call it. We've all got it. We're stuck with it as long as we're in this human form, and we've got to learn to deal with it. We've got to learn to talk to it, in my opinion. And so we can end the self-sabotage. Like Jason was saying before, we are not perfect, but what we watch for is progress. Progress, not perfection. And as long as we're making progress, see, with recovery, you're either moving backwards or you're moving forward. There's no standing still. And so to move forward, we got to be making progress. And we always work on our conscious contact. We've got to work. We've got to become our best self, learn how to stop self-sabotaging. That's very, very important. Because part of what I was doing for those 20 years of my drinking and drugging, I was punishing myself. I knew what I had done as a child was wrong, and so I found ways to punish myself. The drinking, the drugging, leading a double life. I was one guy by night and a different guy by day, and that just doesn't fly. That is destined to fall apart. Being double-minded is what the Bible calls it. Living a double life is what I called it. Now I can be the same guy all the time. I have my integrity back. I've made my amends, and I continue to make living amends to people I've harmed. And it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can really tell the passion that you have, especially the way your eyes lit up when you started talking about the Houston Center for Christian Counseling. Your eyes went up. It tells me you truly believe that what you guys do there is great, and I fully believe it, and I can appreciate the passion. I can appreciate the wanting to pay it forward. But what is the first counseling session like with somebody brand new? What are your goals in that initial counseling session? What can a person expect from that?
Well, I have two things in mind when I'm working with a new person. Okay. First is to get to know them and really listen. Yeah. Very few people are really listened to these days. It's almost a lost art. So I listen to their story. I take notes, and I let them know. I self-disclose, And it's controversial. Some counselors do, some don't. But I've found it's really, really necessary. I'm not shy about recovery anymore, and I'm not shy about my story. I'm not embarrassed. It's one of the stepping stones. The suffering that I went through really led me to. Before being a family therapist, I was in real estate. And I ran a farm with my brothers, and we grew food, we fed people, and I helped people find homes. Those aren't bad jobs,
right?
But God really had a lot better for me. And once I got into recovery, I could recognize, wow, I'm not supposed to be in real estate. I'm supposed to help people, especially kids. And one of the best ways I've found to help kids is to help families. You know, a week has 168 hours in it. And so if I'm helping a child, I thought about being a child psychologist, but if I'm helping a child 1 out of 168 hours, that will have some beneficial effect. But if I can help his parents, I'm helping all 168 hours.
Yeah.
So
it's a good way to look at it.
So the first session, I get to know them, and then I self-disclose and help them understand what recovery looks like and how all of that works. And so I try to paint a picture of what recovery is about, and try to help them know that they are not alone. A lot of people feel very shameful, and they feel very alone. And so we try to chase away those feelings and help them know that there is hope. There is hope.
Hope is super important. Who's super important? Me and Jason were talking about that in a couple episodes ago. Jason, what was your first session like with Harold?
Oh, I had a lot of first sessions with Harold.
I guess the very first one then.
Yeah, it was probably a blur, wasn't it, Jason?
It was a blur. I don't remember a whole lot of it. To be honest with you, the first session, I was probably intoxicated. There were a lot of sessions that I went in to talk to Harold and ask Harold for help. I remember one instance. There was an evening that you met me at the office about 11 o'clock at night, and I asked you to come out to my car with me, and I unloaded bottle after bottle after bottle. Do you remember that, Harold?
Yes, I do, and so does my boss.
Yeah,
I had put those bottles in the fridge so that we can find some use for them. The next morning, my boss, who's in recovery, to say that, found those bottles in there, and he thought, "What is this?"
I can only imagine the look on his face.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's probably one of my most memorable restarts into the program was giving up all my liquor.
But I've got to acknowledge, Jason, you kept coming back, and that took a lot of courage, and it paid off.
It did pay off, yeah. Yeah, and I remember, even as recently as a year ago, you and I had the conversation about my pain medicine, and I was honestly worried about the pain medicine because, being a cancer patient and being in pain, it's an unlimited supply. You ask for it, they give it to you. And that was a hard time, is getting off the pain meds and coping with my cancer. So.
And you and Kristen work on that as a team. Yeah. You see, the problem when we take our pain meds or when we drink is that it causes a little brain fog, and sometimes we can't remember whether we've taken our medications or taken how many drinks we've had. So it's important to work as a team. My wife and I work as a team. You two work as a team. That's really great.
Yeah, and I I've gotten over the pain medication, and I only take it when I absolutely have to. I've gone into using other things to manage the pain, but the pain medicine itself, it makes you angry, and it you're talking about rage, and it really causes rage within you. Yeah, Kristen's over here shaking her head. Yeah,
Yeah, she's just giving that affirmation.
Hi, Kristen.
yeah. So that's one thing that I really had to stop, and I don't think I was fully addicted to it, but I could tell that if I continued on it, it was going to be a problem, and I wasn't going back down that road.
One of the guidelines is if whatever you're using is causing a personality change, that's a signal. That's a signal. Watch out. So good for you, Jason.
Yeah. So, yep.
Very good. Very good. Jason, what has been the best advice you've ever received from Harold?
One day at a time. Because I use that. Anybody that I talk to that is that's entering their journey into recovery is take it one day at a time. And it was a long time for me to admit to Kristen that I can go without having a drink again. And sometimes she still asks me, and I'm like, it's one day at a time. And that was my response to her. She would ask me, are you ever going to have a drink again? And I would say, I don't know. I'm going to take it one day at a time. And that is something that you think about. I'm never going to do something again. That's a lot of weight on your shoulders to say you're never going to do something again. But if you take it into perspective and say, I'm going to take it one day at a time, it's a lot easier to manage.
Yeah, I can do something for one day that I could never do long term.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I see a lot is the biggest help, the second biggest help is staying away from the bad crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for me, that was all three of my brothers. I got into recovery. They didn't really want recovery. And so I tried for a couple of years to show them that there were many advantages, but they just laughed at me. So I had to step back and say, look, I'm going to love you guys from a distance. I still love them. God loves them. But as long as they're drinking, drugging, doing petty crime, going in and out of jail. Several years ago, when he was still living, of course, I got an email about my oldest brother, my perpetrator. He had gotten arrested again. He was in a jail in Tampa, Florida, age 71.
Wow.
That's just knucklehead. So I keep trying to show them the advantages of recovery, but they're not going to listen. So I had to love them from a distance.
Yeah.
You've got to stay away from the bad crowd. I do anyway.
That's very brave of you, to be able to be that self-aware, to understand, like, hey, my own family isn't good for me right now. I need to step away from them. Very brave. Shows a lot of self-awareness there.
It's sad. Well, I think working in the field helps, that I get to see where being around knucklehead family members can really be stressful.
Yeah.
And, so we got to get some distance, protect ourselves, and protect our kids. Really, a lot of people say, "Oh, you can't get in recovery for other people." Well, I disagree. You can do things for your kids that really gives me a lot of energy, and so it has. Eventually, we have to do it for ourselves. We can also do it for people we love.
Yeah, it's another type of motivation.
That's right.
Doing something for your kids. And like you said before, you are the sum of the people you surround yourself with. You know, if you surround yourself with smart and bright and brilliant people, you're going to get a little bit smarter. Surround yourself with some knuckleheads, and you might tend to lean towards some knucklehead activities.
Absolutely.
Putting it bluntly.
Misery loves company.
And one of the things that Harold told my wife Kristen was, if I was going to continue to drink and drug, that she can pack a bag and set it on the front porch, and I can find somewhere else to stay. And I'll tell you, after going through that a couple times and staying in a hotel for a week or two, you really put things into perspective and say, you know, I don't want to be alone. I want my family. And if I can't do this for myself, you know, do it for your family. Mm-hmm. And you know, at first for me, it was doing it for my family because I didn't want to lose my family. I love my family. But then as time went on and things happened in my life, I started doing it for myself. Yeah. And I just don't want to be sick anymore. I have so much more energy now and clarity on life when I'm not intoxicated.
To the mic.
Okay, cool. Well, hey, one topic that I did want to discuss with you, Harold, is you know, one of the struggles that I went through with my addiction, I don't want to say the underlying cause of it, but a big part of my addiction was the medication that I was on for bipolar. And the one thing that you stood by my side every time that I went into a treatment center, but a lot of these addiction facilities do not recognize a dual diagnosis.
That's right.
And
special facilities that do dual diagnosis treatment.
Yeah, and one of the struggles that I had, there were some great treatment facilities that my family wanted me to go to, but I just was not interested because I had to get off of my bipolar medication. Yeah. And, you know, I know what happens when I get off the medication. I start drinking and drugging even heavier. Yes. And that's been my issue. Every time a doctor says, well, you know, I don't think you need this medication anymore, and they take me off of it and stop prescribing it to me, is when I start the downward spiral. And that's part of the spiraling upward. The ministry, the podcast, the book is spiraling upward because I'm on a great treatment path, being able to see the counselors and the psychiatrists that treat dual diagnosis. And that I think that's a very big role in society, especially with the church and these treatment facilities, is being able to handle dual diagnosis patients.
Yes, it's more costly, and a lot of people have figured out there's a lot of money to be made there's a lot of money to be made from drug treatment, so they want to hire the cheapest people they can and offer the streamlined type of care. Dual diagnosis care costs more to present. People need higher qualifications. It's more expensive to produce, and so a lot of these centers skip it. So there are centers and there are centers, and you want to go to someone who knows dual diagnosis treatment, and it's a different sort of animal, and it's very important to allow us to stay on our mental health meds and stay away from alcohol and drugs at the same time. So I'm glad you found people that can help you with that. Not just everybody can help people that have dual diagnosis. Mm-hmm. A mental health problem along with an addiction problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was a big part of what I was missing in life, was the medication to keep me sane. And you know, a doctor took me off of you know, the big thing for me is sleep. If I don't have sleep, it all goes downhill from there, and that is my down spiral. if I don't have my sleeping medication, I heard you mention earlier about the mind-altering substances. With a dual diagnosis patient, it is a little bit different because you do have to take those mind-altering substances in order to be able to function on a day-to-day basis. If I don't take my sleeping medication and it knocks me out, I'm not going to sleep. And there's been times, I think I've seen you, Harold, when I've gone 3, 4, or 5 days without sleeping, and I look like hell. And I don't know how I function on it, but I just don't sleep. Yeah. And that's part of my bipolar diagnosis.
That's right. People with the bipolar can spend many sleepless nights, and it's very serious, very serious. Sleep is the topic that I talk to people most about. It's probably the most important topic in the office. Going several days without sleep is extremely harmful. So I'm glad you mentioned that. We need to let our listeners know it's very important to sleep.
Yeah, and I heard a study going 24 hours without sleep is like blowing a .08.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. You can even see it in the way people drive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know how I am if I don't get my at least 6 hours. I couldn't imagine being up for 36 hours, 48 hours straight, even past that, like Jason said. I couldn't imagine. I don't think I would be able to function at all.
It's pretty amazing. And now medical science has some new video technology where they can actually video what's happening in the brain while we sleep.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing, the way God has made the human body. When we sleep, the brain cells actually shrink slightly, causing a negative pressure in the cranium, which draws cerebral spinal fluid up throughout the brain and rinses out the toxins from the brain. That's why we feel alert and alive in the morning when we wake up. The brain is free of those toxins. Every cell, as it operates, creates toxins. And from the neck down, we have the lymphatic system to remove the toxins. But from the neck up, the brain uses our cerebral spinal fluid to rinse the brain while we sleep.
Wow, that's truly amazing, especially when you start getting into the science of it all.
Yeah, I saw that on a TED Talk. They were showing the video
TED Talks
of the brain rinsing itself. It's a great, the name of that video is Why Sleep is So Important. And it's really a beautiful thing to see.
I'll find it and I'll link it in the description of this video for our listeners to see. Before our quick break, we had a quick question for, I say quick, it's not a quick question at all. It's actually kind of a big question. But for Harold, it was how often do you find depression is either a primary or secondary symptom of your patients?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Alcohol is a depressant. Marijuana is a depressant. Also, Xanax and the other benzodiazepines can cause depression. People use those to calm down before they fly on an airplane. But a lot of kids use those recreationally. And so which is the chicken, which is the egg? Is the depression causing the alcohol problem, or is the alcohol causing the depression? The way to tell is to quit the alcohol, quit the marijuana, quit the Xanax and the other benzodiazepines, and then see how you feel. And we can't just quit something like that that's harmful. We've got to substitute something healthy. I recommend exercise, walking, and so forth.
Yeah.
So after a couple of weeks of zero alcohol and walking instead, or zero marijuana and walking and getting that blood circulating, the best treatment for depression is exercise.
Wow.
There's a lot of research now about the medications like Prozac, and if you really look at the research and you know how to read it, it shows that Prozac is barely more effective than a sugar pill, than a placebo. So you've got to look at those placebo studies. Dr. David D. Burns has done a lot of research on the antidepressants, and so it's very interesting. I have a lot of people who are using exercise now, and they are so glad to be away from the side effects of depressants. Now, of the antidepressants, I mean. I'm not a doctor, and so I'm telling you, follow your doctor's orders. We can also add exercise, and it has a huge, huge effect, much larger effect than you would think. So a lot of people have depression. Pastor Rick Warren has done some wonderful work supporting depression research. He wrote the book Purpose Driven Life. And I love what I love about Rick is that when the book took off around the world and translated into so many languages, millions of dollars flowed in. At first, he was funding AIDS research, HIV and AIDS research. But then when he lost his son to depression and suicide in 2013, at the age of 27, he and his wife Kay switched their funding over to depression research, mental health research.
Yeah.
It's really wonderful. He stated that at that time 40 million people in the world had AIDS. 400 million people had depression.
Wow.
So it's a much bigger need, and it's highly treatable. It's highly treatable. The medications are like putting a cast on a broken leg. If you have a broken leg, it would be silly to have it flopping around.
Right.
You've got to put a cast on it. But you don't want to leave the cast on too long. If you read the PDR, the physician's desk reference about the medication you're taking, you can see in there the guidelines for how long to use it. And the pharmaceutical companies are required to say some of the medications are not recommended for long-term use. We've got to pay attention to the whole picture and really take all that into consideration.
Yeah, have to see the forest through the trees.
That's it.
That's right. That's right. As we continue to kind of talk about depression and anxiety and those things, I'm curious, do you find suicide becoming a dangerous trend, or thoughts of suicide?
Yes, as I said earlier, it's on the rise.
Yeah.
We're making any progress with it. Among the military, ex-military, it's 3 times normal.
Wow.
Also, something that people don't recognize very much is that among the gay population, it's 3 times what's normal. And that's a big, big concern to me. I specialize in suicide prevention, and it's not that difficult to prevent suicide. If you really listen to someone, talk to them, just ask them straight out, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of taking your life? Just ask them. It doesn't do any harm to ask them. If they're not serious about it, they'll say, no, I'm not, and no harm done. If they are serious about it, they will be relieved that you are willing to just talk in plain language about it directly. Yeah. So that is what we do. Talking to someone for 30 minutes and really listening to their story can save a life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I remember you talked a little bit about it's kind of it's not practiced very often now, but just being that person to really, really listen to your patients and understand what they need and empathize with them. It seems like that's kind of one of the little things that you do to kind of separate yourself apart. I was talking to Jason earlier in the pre-show. I was saying, a lot of good physicians do the big things right, right? But what makes them great as opposed to good is what they do with the little things. And so it sounds like when you're really empathizing with them or talking to them in straight language, that you're doing some of the little things right. And so it's the suicide prevention is a hot topic with us and Jason. But Jason, I was curious, what little things does Harold do to kind of set him apart from everybody else?
The biggest thing that helps me is the prayer before and after the counseling session.
Yeah.
The one thing that I've always struggled with is continuing my walk with Christ, even through the dark times. It's become easier over the years, and working with Harold has made it a lot easier. But just knowing that, if you are thinking about, harming yourself or taking your life, knowing that you have somebody that'll listen to you, and they're not, they don't, what's the word? They don't criticize you for the way you feel. They're an open ear, open dialogue, and the support system behind it is tremendous. If nobody has any idea that you're thinking of taking your life or harming yourself, nobody knows how to help you. So if you talk about it, and you talk about it with somebody you trust, and having that support system to be able to rely on, makes a big difference.
For sure.
Yes, and let me add that as we talk about all those feelings, feeling depressed and feeling really down, wishing that you could go to sleep and not wake up in the morning, life has really got you down. Some people in that situation will go to a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist or their family doctor and get some antidepressants. So you may have noticed on TV, they're talking about these antidepressants, and the attorneys force them to mention at the end of the commercial, with a man's voice talking very fast, that some of the side effects include suicidal thoughts. Well, the most interesting thing occurs when a person's deeply depressed and then they take some antidepressants. They get just enough energy that often they have suicidal thoughts, and they have enough energy to kill themselves.
Wow.
So that can actually be a danger sign of suicide. If you have a family member who's very down, and then they get some medications and they're feeling more energy, you want to talk to them plainly and ask them if they're feeling like taking their lives, because some people do commit suicide at that time when they've been depressed, and then they get something that picks up their mood. Isn't that ironic?
That's very ironic. You would think that someone that kind of picks up their mood and would lift their spirits would really help them. But, yeah.
Yes, but it's just enough that they have the energy to kill themselves.
Right.
So we want to be real about that. Years ago, Dr. Scott Peck, the great psychiatrist, said, mental health is a commitment to reality at all cost. Mental health is a commitment to reality at all cost. So we want to be real above everything else, but not judgmental. I'm not talking about being judgmental or criticizing. I'm talking about being real, validating what someone's feeling, validate their experience. Now, I'd like to make available to you a tool that really works to help people that are having suicidal thoughts. It's called a safety plan. It really works. You fill out all these items on the safety plan, what your resources are and who your go-to people are, and you fill it out completely. and you share it with somebody, and you carry it in your wallet, and you've got emergency phone numbers there and friends' phone numbers, and it's a plan on how to keep yourself safe and who you can call, what your resources are, and you keep it right in your wallet. So we'll make that available. You could probably go on the internet and Google suicide safety plans and get one off of there. They're pretty simple, but they're really helpful and useful.
Well, thank you. We surely do appreciate that. So when we're talking about, you were just talking about some of the medication that some people could take, and it kind of lifts their mood up just a little bit. But what I'm going to ask you about some warning signs. What are some warning signs that parents, spouses, friends should be looking for if their loved one is addicted or having suicidal thoughts? What are some different things they could be on the lookout for?
Okay, that's really two different questions. So let me
We'll break it down first.
each one at a time. The different substances have different warning signs that show whether your loved one is addicted, and those include red bloodshot eyes, behavior change. If a kid, let's talk about teenagers.
Okay.
If a child loses interest in things they've been interested in, that could be a sign of drug addiction and also a sign of depression. Actually, let's begin with depression.
Sure.
Losing interest in things that you were interested in before, having a low mood, being blue, down, having low energy, sleeping way too much, or not being able to sleep. Those are all signs of depression. Changed friends. For kids in school, if their grades drop, that could be a sign of depression, and that they should see a doctor, have someone to talk to. You can start with your family doctor, and what's available to families these days are the urgent care clinics. They're covered under your insurance. Call your insurance company, find out which urgent care clinic is covered under your policy, and show up there. It's a $30 copay, $30 or $40, instead of a $500 emergency room visit.
Right.
And talk to a doctor, have the kids seen. It's quite simple. Let me say this, if your child is complaining that they don't want to live any longer, they just want to go to sleep and never wake up, they wish they were never born, scoop that kid up, take them to the urgent care clinic, and have them talk to a doctor. That's a good practice. If they don't mean it and they're just seeking attention, that'll give them the attention they're seeking, and they need to talk to a doctor. If they're saying things like that, they need to understand how serious it is to say things like that. If they are intentional and they're meaning what they say, they need to talk to a doctor.
Right.
Because you've got to do the things to prevent the suicide. If you've got a family member who is having an episode and they're at home and they're screaming and yelling and they're threatening to kill themselves, call in the paramedics right away, and they will help. They will get a doctor involved. They'll give them something to calm them down. Don't guess about this. Be on the side of safety. Call in the paramedics, and that's how to take care of these things. So if your teenager is threatening suicide, or your little child, I've had kids as young as 7 that I've helped with their suicidal thoughts, we scoop them up and take them to see a doctor. If they didn't mean it, it's good for them to talk to a doctor. If they did mean it, it's good for them to talk to a doctor. And when you do that every time, there was one girl, she was 11, and she used that as a tool to manipulate her family. Well, they scooped her up, took her to the doctor 3 times, and she stopped it.
Wow.
So that's what to do about depression. You can recognize it. The grades drop, people lose interest, they change friend groups, and they don't take care of themselves anymore. They don't bathe. Well, how do you tell with a teenager? They don't want to bathe anyway, some of them. But they stop their grooming. They won't eat as much, or maybe they will eat a lot more. Changes in behavior, all those are signs of depression, and you should go start with your family doctor or an urgent care clinic. And what we're finding is it's pretty hard to get in to see a psychiatrist these days. Jason and I went through that. There were sometimes months until you could see your psychiatrist. So that's when a nurse practitioner comes in handy. They are trained to prescribe medications, and some of them are more current on the current medications than the physicians. So wow. I think nurse practitioners are fantastic.
That's excellent.
So back to the how to recognize a drug problem.
Yes.
It depends on the substance. You can tell if a kid is smoking marijuana, their eyes will be bloodshot. They will have laughter at odd times. They'll be very hungry. They'll have the munchies. They'll want to eat everything in sight. And little by little, their motivation will go down. Their grades usually drop after a while with marijuana. The two main symptoms of marijuana side effects are motivation problems and memory problems. Marijuana is not harmless. It's a powerful medication. It helps many people with cancer and with glaucoma.
Right.
And have you heard the news from Denver?
I haven't.
Since marijuana was made legal, big companies are having a terrible time. People won't show up for work. They lack motivation. They want to just sit home and smoke weed. And also traffic accidents involving THC are way up. It slows down your reaction times. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. So if a person's smoking marijuana, they should not be on the road driving. They can be on the road riding, take an Uber. So a lot of kids develop alcohol problems. They're drinking. And of course, the signs of drinking are, again, bloodshot eyes, balance problems, slurred speech. Alcohol numbs the brain. And so the first thing to numb is the vision center, and things get blurry. The second is the speech center. The speech gets slurred, and people talk a little slower, and kind of you can tell when someone's been drinking. And they have balance problems as the ears go numb. The ears can't work, and so people who are drinking tend to talk louder too.
Yeah.
And so those are signs. Now, alcohol wears off in about 12 hours. So what I recommend for parents of teenagers is to do random urine tests. There are two advantages to it. Number one, you get to know what your kid is doing with a scientific method. You can buy urine test kits on Amazon for not much money, and take the random urine tests right at home. Have them pee in a cup. So one, you get to know information about your kid, and information is power, and we can keep our kids safe if we have more information. Secondly, and you know how to restrict their privileges if you know that they're messing up. Secondly, it's an advantage to the kid. At first, kids don't like it, but after a while, they figure out that it gives them a perfect excuse to say no thank you when kids offer them a joint or a drink at school. They can say, no, I can't. My parents are urine testing me. And they have a different word for it. They say, my parents are piss testing me. But it gives them a great excuse. They can save face. They can turn the drugs down. And it's a win-win situation. So I recommend it as a standard procedure, parents. So that's alcohol, marijuana,
Sure.
Xanax. People go into kind of a trance state with Xanax. It's a benzodiazepine. It's meant to reduce anxiety, but it's really easy to get addicted to Xanax. Every once in a while, I talk to people who have been taking it 20 years. That is awful. It was never meant to be taken for 20 years. Xanax is highly addictive. We develop a tolerance to it, and that enemy voice says, oh, you need another pill in order to get the same effect that you got before. We're always chasing that first high. So Xanax, people feel sluggish, low energy. They can't really think straight. They're not sharp. They can't converse well. Let's talk about the amphetamine products, crystal meth. It's a cheap drug. The high lasts about 6 hours. A lot of kids smoke it. And it's extremely damaging to the body. Amphetamines rob the body of calcium. The skin goes bad. Hair falls out in clumps. The teeth get brittle and crack and fall out. I used to work in the county jail doing a family therapy program for the inmates, and I had these 4 guys. They were each 20 years old, and they were all bald-headed. They were meth addicts. We call them tweakers because they go like that. It disturbs the nervous system. And between these 4 guys, only one of them had one tooth left in his mouth. They were all no teeth, bald heads, 20 years old. And it makes you look like you're 40. Just caves in the face. Methamphetamines is very addicting, very cheap, and the high lasts a lot longer than cocaine. It's really hard to tell if somebody's a cocaine addict. It doesn't show many outward signs, and it's a stimulant, like coffee, only way powerful, very expensive. One of the best ways to detect it is if there's white powder on the nostrils or the upper lip, and another way to detect that addiction is if there's money missing. That's also what parents can watch for with teenagers. Are they missing money out of their wallets? A lot of kids will steal from their parents to get their drugs after a while.
Yeah.
What else should we talk about?
Well, I was just curious. So you gave us lots of stuff to consider, especially with and being able to be vigilant and understand some of the warning signs for a lot of these different some drugs and depression and thoughts. A lot of really good information. But I'm curious: is it ever too early in the addiction process to seek counseling?
Counseling is a good idea, and one of the ways to begin, if you're worried about a family member that has an addiction problem, you can do an intervention, and I can give you instructions for an intervention also. I help people with interventions, right. And the bottom line on the intervention is you're asking your loved one to go get an assessment. It's standardized across the nation. The assessment will measure how big the problem is and give a recommendation for what to do next. And it's a very healthy idea to pressure your family member into going to get an assessment.
Yeah.
And so that's what the intervention is about, offering lovingly some gentle pressure to get that assessment. So you ask people attending the intervention to write letters. And Grandma's letter, the letter has 5 parts. Let me just go through that really quick. Part 1 is how much you love the person and why, what you admire about them. There are things, even the biggest mess up, there are still things we admire. You got to list those and write them down. And so you can read those to the person and give the letter to the person.
Right.
Secondly, you talk about what you know about the problem and how you know it, what you've seen, what you've heard. That's very helpful to have in the letter. You want to stay away from blame and anger, but you want to lovingly tell them what you've heard and seen. Thirdly, you want in the letter, part 3 is where you tell them how frightened you are for their welfare and how scared you are for their health. Fourthly, you want to say, please get help. We've set up this treatment center. All you need to do is show up. You'll get an assessment, and they'll be able to help you right away. And then part 5 of the letter is you articulate what you're going to have to do to take care of yourself if they will not go get help right away. And in Grandma's letter, she says, I'm going to write you out of the will. And the spouse in her letter says, I'm going to kick you out of the house. We're not going to live together. We're not talking divorce. We're just talking about separation so that it'll put some pressure on the person. And that really helped Jason when he had to leave the house for a while, as he said earlier. And the kids will say, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, Daddy, unless you go get help. So that puts the teeth into the intervention. You explain what you're going to have to do to take care of yourself if they won't go get help. You can't live like this anymore. So that's an intervention, and that's what we want to do. You've got to invite the right people. You don't want people who will get angry and blaming and critical.
Right.
You want people who can show up, speak their hearts, but not cave in.
Sure.
Because when the wife puts the person out of the house, if somebody else in the intervention says, well, that's okay, you can come and live with me, oh, that's awful.
Right.
That's shooting themselves in the foot.
For sure. Definitely.
Right.
Anyway, very good. So never too early to see some counseling and get that intervention done. I'm curious, Jason, question for you. At what point throughout your process, did you seek help?
Several times.
Right. I guess
yeah,
I mean specifically from Harold.
It was probably 2012, 2013 when I first went and saw Harold, and a lot of that was I didn't know where else to turn. I didn't know what to do. I knew I couldn't continue going down this path, but it was still it was still fresh in my head. And
what were some of the things that helped you realize you couldn't continue on that path? Was it Kristen?
Yeah, it was losing my family. Kristen saying, you got to move out of the house. And I was in a hotel for probably 10 days before she let me back in. And even when she let me back in, I was sleeping in another room. Yeah. And it tore me up that I didn't have the same relationship with my wife or my kids that I wanted, and it really hits home when you get your life turned upside down and taken away from you. It makes you want to get things straight.
Okay, very good. As we kind of wrap it up here, this last question for both of you. And maybe Jason, you can go first. If someone is listening to this podcast right now and they need help, what should they do? What's step one? What do they need to do right now?
Ask for it. Ask a family member. Ask the ministry. Ask our ministry. Shoot us an email. Get in to see a therapist. If you ask for help, help can be found. What Harold was saying about going to the urgent care, there are options all over the place. And we can put a list of those on the blog for this episode. But ask for help. Ask a family member, and there's options. The one thing that our ministry is striving to do is put people in touch with others that can help. I'm not a licensed counselor. I'm an ear that can listen. I can provide some guidance and support on where to turn. But you just got to ask for the help.
And I'm looking up right now the suicide hotline number. And let's see. Well, let me get that to you.
Here, I have it right here.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have a 366 days a year. This year has 366. It's leap year. There are people who care, who are trained to listen to your story at the other end of the suicide hotlines. And also, there are also numbers. If you think you've got a drinking problem or a drug problem, you can call the hotline, and there are lots of hotlines, and the people are trained, and they'll get you the help you need. So that's Jason's right. The first thing to do is ask, and
Harold, I have that national suicide hotline, prevention hotline is 1-800-273-8255. Again, 1-800-273-8255.
I'll post that down in the description below as well for people to be able to call if they need it.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Harold, Mr. Boggs. Again, Harold Boggs, he is a licensed family therapist at the Houston Center for Christian Counseling. If you guys are local to the Houston area, be sure to give him a call. Be sure to stop by. If you need help, he is always there for you. Jason, do you have anything else before we kind of wrap it up?
No, Harold, thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure having you on.
It's my privilege. My privilege.
Thank you. Guys, as we kind of wrap this up, you can find us and listen to us where all podcasts can be heard on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and we also upload this to YouTube. Again, I'm going to have that hotline number, suicide prevention hotline number, down in the description below. If you need it, I'll provide that for you guys. Be sure to leave a like and comment down below, and we'll guys see you on the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.